Hello and welcome to another edition of Profiles and Issues, the cable television show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Join us each month on Cablevision, Channel 75, Verizon Fios, Channel 34, or on your computer or iPhone on YouTube.com and www.greenbergny.com. Go to the left-hand green side of the website page and press Public Access TV on demand to view the broadcast right away. We want to make the program interactive with you, the audience, so please email us at profile.issue@yahoo.com. Let us know your opinion about the program and the issues presented. Our topic tonight, the race for Westchester County Executive. Our profile is George Latimer. George Latimer was born and raised in Westchester County in Mount Vernon. He attended and graduated the Mount Vernon public school system. George graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree from Fordham University and a master's degree in public administration from New York University's Wagner School. He worked for 20 years as a marketing executive in the hospitality industry for major organizations, including subsidiaries of Nestle's and ITT. He first ran for public office 30 years ago in a heavily Republican area and won a seat on the Rye City Council. In 1991, he ran for the Westchester County Board of Legislators and was the first Democrat to win the 7th District seat. He was re-elected numerous times and served till 2004. In 1998, Democrats won a majority of seats on the board, and George was the first Democrat elected as the chairman of the Westchester County Board of Legislators. He was the first chair to pick members of the minority party to chair committees alongside Democrats. During his tenure as chairman, he opened up county government to the people by establishing cable television coverage of meetings. Under his leadership, property taxes decreased by 7%, and he worked to pass legislation on human rights, environmental protection, gun safety and control, and the 2001 redistricting plan. In 2004, he ran and won a seat in the New York State Assembly, where he was elected 4 times. In January 2012, he ran and won a seat in the New York State Senate's 37th District, where he is the ranking minority member on education. He has run 3 successful Senate races against heavily financed Republican opponents, winning in such places as Eastchester and Bronxville. He has never lost an election. I have been doing cable television periodically since the 1980s and have noticed that George Latimer has an inclusive personality when it comes to his leadership role in government, his constituents, and the press. He is always accessible for an interview and seeks to find common ground among his colleagues in government, his constituents, and the political parties in our democracy. It is an honor and privilege to have back on the program New York State Senator and now the 2017 Democratic Party nominee for Westchester County Executive, George Latimer. George, great to see you again.
Dennis, thank you very much. Nice to be back. That was a very terrific interview. I should introduction.
I'm sorry.
I should stop right now and just call it
I actually had more information, but we had to cut it short.
Even my blessed mother doesn't want to hear the long version.
Because, as you know, we have a time limit on the program.
Obviously.
All right, let's get right to it.
Sure.
A lot has happened since the last time you've been here. This past week, there was violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. Demonstrators from the far right, as well as supposedly from the left, But really, the far-right demonstrators were demonstrating about taking down monuments regarding the Civil War of Robert E. Lee and other Confederate figures. And then violence broke out. Most news outlets and most politicians say it was extremist groups that were responsible, such as the KKK and groups like that. Only President Trump says that. Only President Trump seems to blame everybody. What is your take on this?
Well, as far as you can determine, living in New York and watching events unfold on television, first of all, we'll start with what exactly happened. In Charlottesville, the Charlottesville City Council made the decision that they were going to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee. That was a governmental decision of what to do within their governmental jurisdiction. It wasn't imposed by any outside entity. It was the groups that protested that decision that formed, many of whom were not from Charlottesville, from elsewhere, and they came together, and the neo-Nazis and the KKK were the two most prominent groups. And they're obviously very agitated, and they feel that from their perspective on the right, that this is a wrong thing. And they have a right to free speech, and you get a permit, and you go stand in a park, and you have your right for free assembly, peaceable assembly. The people who protested their protest also have a right to speak. And I would think that if something like this would have happened in Westchester County, our county and local police would be better able to keep the two groups apart and to try to keep them from having any of that direct conflict, because both groups have a right to free speech. Having said that, what happened that made this a tragedy was not equal. It was an individual who was a white supremacist who took his car into a crowd of protesters. That is the specific action that happened that made this from just an argument between different people into a tragedy. That individual will have to face criminal prosecution and ultimate penalty if they're found to be guilty, which it appears from the outside they are. But then to take this as a launching off point and to use it to attack both sides is ridiculous. Here's the bottom line. In this country, we're divided on our opinions. We have different positions from the left to the right and all gradations in between. We have to call each situation as it appears on the merits of the situation. When there is violence on the left, when people riot and they destroy public property, they're wrong. They may have grievances, they may have their anger, they have every right to express it. They have every right for free speech. They have every right for free assembly. They do not have a right for violence or destruction of human beings or property. And the same is true on the right. And I don't think any elected official, from the president on down to a city councilman, should give aid and comfort to anybody who has practiced violence. And I will tell you this as a final comment on this. It really comes down to people who are responsible on the left should speak out when people on the far left act inappropriately, and people on the right who hold conservative views should speak out when people on the far right are have crossed the line and have committed violence and behavior. Because anytime the opposite sides criticize each other, it's just one more divisive argument between the right and the left. But people who hold responsible conservative views need to speak out against the neo-Nazis and the KKK, just like people who hold progressive views should speak out against the radicals of the left.
If you were county executive and these groups wanted to come and demonstrate here in Westchester County, would you set up different criteria or guidelines? And by that I mean, again, I can't substantiate this because I heard numerous news reports, but I heard that they actually brought weapons with them, or that the police did not have proper barricades set up.
Well,
would you allow a demonstration?
Well, first of all, there's a right to free speech and right to free assembly, which I've just asserted. So if groups of that nature wanted to protest, now keep in mind we have an interesting structure here in Westchester County. If you're going to do it in a county park facility on parkland, Kensico Dam, or playland, places that the county operates, it's the county government and the county police that will authorize these things and verify the details. If it's going to happen in an area that's under municipal control, in a park or on the streets of Yonkers or Greenburgh or Mount Vernon or Larchmont or Scarsdale, then the local government is the primary player, and the county government assists with additional help, SWAT team, whatever someone thinks is necessary. And what I would say would be three things. Number one, the groups have to properly go through a permitting process to access legitimate location for their protest, and we would try to put those protests in a place that did not obstruct traffic or the normal flow of activity and behavior. The second thing is is that anybody who has a counter protest to the protest has equal right to express their views, and then it comes down to the wise decisions of the police officers that are ranking, whether it's county police on a county property or municipal police on a municipal property, to determine where you're going to cordon off these groups so that they're not face-to-face, they're not within arm's reach of each other, and behave in a way that leads to conflict. And that's where the prominent police presence is necessary. And I would also say, remember that the gun laws in Virginia are very different from the gun laws in New York. We do not permit concealed carry unless you have that authorized. And to have that authorized is a process that you have to go through. In some states, I'm not sure of Virginia's law, I know that in places like in Florida and Texas, you can carry a concealed weapon without any need for further restrictions. That's not the way we play it in Westchester County. So you would have to follow those laws. Free speech, whether I like it or don't like it, is always appropriate because of the Constitution. Right to assembly is always appropriate, no matter how heinous your views are to me or somebody else. But you will conduct yourself in Westchester County with decorum and appropriateness, or our police force in the middle will make sure that you do. And obviously
thanks.
we won't qualify.
We have to move on. President Trump's executive order restricting travel by refugees and immigrants from 7 Muslim-majority countries has upset many residents in the county. As a result, the Westchester County Board of Legislators recently passed the Immigration Protection Act, which aims to prevent the county from aiding the federal government in investigations made on the basis of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, and national origin. It also prohibits county officials from honoring requests made by ICE, Customs, and Border Protection that do not give probable cause, and protects Westchester from liability due to false arrests and imprisonment. County Executive Rob Astorino has said that he will veto the bill. What is your view on the bill and the county executive's position?
Well, the county executive has vetoed the Immigrant Protection Act as we speak today. I think he's made the wrong decision, and I'll tell you why. Our primary interest is in the safety of our residents. And when he has argued, and he has police who report to him argue the same position that he has, that we are less safe if the Immigrant Protection Act is in place, absolutely wrong. We are less safe by not having this in place, and I'll tell you why. In situations where the police, the local police, are trying to do their normal, everyday police work, there's been a harassment, or God help us, a rape, or a murder, or some felony or high level of misdemeanor, the police go in to try to determine, detective work, who's responsible for that crime. In that process, you look for witnesses to come forward. You want the victim's help and the people around the victim to help you identify so you can find the right person who's done this, prosecute them, and bring them to justice. When you send the message out there that you're willing to join what the federal government has in terms of rooting out people because of their documented status, you send a chilling message into those communities. And you tell the individual, next door to you there may be a boyfriend beating up on his girlfriend, but you are not going to say anything because the police are going to come in and they're going to say, oh, what's your documentation status? Or what's the documentation status of your husband? Rather than, what did you see and what are you willing to testify to? And then, if you're afraid to step forward as either a victim to report a crime or as a witness to report what you saw in the crime, if you're afraid to step forward, then that criminal goes free. They make the argument that the Immigrant Protection Act would somehow help MS-13 and these gangs. Dead wrong. Because whenever you have a judicial warrant that tries to break up these gangs, we would have full cooperation at every level of police work with them. We do that now. We would continue to do that in the future. But the real issue here is about politics. And in the politics, there's a certain core group of people in the country, and they voted for the president, and they support the current county executive, and they have an absolutist position on immigration. They don't want immigrants coming into the country, and they want to take out from the country as many of the immigrant population as they believe they can justify taking out of the country. This is no different, Dennis, than 100 years ago when my antecedents and your antecedents came to this country. This country did not welcome the Irish or the Italian or the Jewish or the German populations when they first came. They may have come here because we needed the raw labor, But at that point in time, they were resented, they were treated prejudicially. Now, 100 years later, the grandsons and the great-grandsons of those very same ethnic groups are providing the same kind of opposition to people who are coming from other parts of the world.
All right, I've got to move on.
Yeah, but I want to make, listen,
right.
I want to make sure I answer the question thoroughly.
All right.
It's important to hear the thorough
All
answer.
right. You introduced legislation in the state Senate to deal with hate crimes, like making bomb threats to community centers with religious affiliations. Do you feel the county, do you feel the county as well as the country has become more divided as a result of its political leadership?
I think it has, and I think what we have now in the country is an absolutist attitude on ideology. You mentioned in my introduction that when I became the first Democratic chair of the county legislature, I appointed Republicans to chair committees, which I did. And I did it on a broad basis, broader than any of my predecessors who may have done one or two examples of it. I did it across the board. In so doing, I respected the fact that you can have disagreement in position or philosophy, but you can still work together. Now what I see you having is political leadership that tries to further divide us by highlighting the differences, by saying that you're liberal and I'm conservative, or the reverse, and doing it in a way that minimizes our common American values. We might disagree on an issue, but we either sit down and work it through, or we say, I'm never going to cooperate with you and I'm going to try to destroy you and your point of view. And I'm afraid that's where we're moving in the country. So as the potential county executive, my effort will be to go back and try to reestablish respect across the aisle and respect of people with alternate points of view, that we dialogue and not demonize.
But I've also noticed, and this just came up as a result of what you said, sometimes the rhetoric that leaders give don't always match their actions. And I'll give you an example as I was doing research for this interview. When President Trump first announced his immigration executive order, the county executive went out of his way to visit Muslim mosques. He even may have appointed one or two to his administration. And he said to them, I will always be there for you. And yet he has not supported the county legislature in protecting these people. Doesn't that show an inconsistency?
Well, it does, and I think this is why we have elections in the United States of America. You get a choice. In November, you're going to walk into a voting booth, and you're going to be able to look at the incumbent, Republican, conservative incumbent, and you're going to look at his record and what he's done. And you're going to look at his challenger. And if I'm the Democratic challenger, you're going to look at my record. And you get to assess both of those things and decide who's been consistent with the philosophy, who has really worked across the aisle, who has really reached out to people who hold different positions, and who's just made the surface effort. I don't speak Spanish. I have a few phrases in Spanish. But when I deal with people who are Spanish speaking, it's not my ability to communicate in their native language that matters. It's the principles, what I believe in, what I'm willing to fight for. And that, I think, differentiates me from the incumbent.
Thank you very much for that. When you served as chairman of the Westchester County Board of Legislators, the County Human Rights Commission was formed with the purpose of allowing residents to report instances of discrimination without going through the state system. Is it still functioning, and do you think it's doing a good job in serving the people?
No. I think the vision of Andrea Stewart Cousins and Lois Bronze, who were the people who originally envisioned this. Andrea gets credit as the prime sponsor, Lois as a voice of great dignity over the many years, both of them as African-American women, presented this before us. I was the chair of the Board of Legislators. In essence, I became the chief legislative manager for the legislation to try to get the pieces together to help make them happen. And we passed what we thought was a good law. It was administered immediately thereafter under the Spano administration appropriately. We had people like Dolores Braithwaite, who is now a judge, as the chief executive of that body. And it did its job in two areas, Dennis: public education and adjudication of complaints and claims. Public education. We have hate groups out there now How do we combat that with public education? You have interfaith forums that the county works with local areas to do, to highlight these things, to root out the anti-Semitism, to root out the anti-Catholicism, to root out the racism that exists, and to give it light and to show in broad daylight that these are failed philosophies. And you do that by education. Now, under the current administration, there is no commitment to the Human Rights Commission. The Astorino administration would rather it be done away with. And most of the people who voted no on the Human Rights Commission come from the same philosophy that currently run the government. If I have the opportunity to be county executive, I'm going to clean house. I'm going to put people in who are qualified, diverse, who are going to be able to make that commission do what its mission was: public education, adjudication of complaints, and do it fairly and honestly.
So in other words, even though they've kept the commission, the title, it's really not functioning.
I don't believe it's functioning as intended.
Right. Okay. There is an international, when I say it's international in its origin, its money, its scope, is an international anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist movement here in the United States, which seeks to discredit Israel and the Jewish people by advocating a policy of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the country and the Jewish people. Its goal is to promote sympathy for the Palestinians living in occupied territories by depicting Israel as violating their human rights and causing all of the problems in the Middle East. It refuses to recognize Israel's right to exist as a free, democratic Jewish state. What is your response to the activities of this organization?
Well, first of all, as a Roman Catholic, as a Christian, I believe that Israel has the right to exist as a state. It has the right to survival, and some of the things that they're being criticized for is merely a state that is under siege all around it by hostile neighbors, and they're trying to survive. Having said that, I do not necessarily endorse the policies of this particular Israeli government. And some of their policies under Prime Minister Netanyahu, were I an Israeli, I would not support or vote for. But it is possible, as it is with the United States, to see the Trump administration as the current leadership of America, and then America the nation, America the concept, as being something separate and distinct from that. And that's how I differentiate what I like. Now, I'm not running for national office. I'm not running for the Congress of the United States. So what a state senator or a county executive thinks about particular policies, West Bank settlements or growth and so forth, is really better left to Congress members and U.S. senators. But I would say this, that to hurt Israel the state because you don't like the current leadership of Israel's government is not wise. You're going to destabilize and help Israel's enemies, many of whom are our enemies. Now, Israel is at peace at present with Egypt and with Jordan, and we need to strengthen those bonds of relationships, knowing that in Syria, the state has collapsed, in Iran, hostile environment, that these are difficult situations. I would also say, in fairness, there are many Palestinians who have a legitimate case of having been treated badly. And some of that has been at the hands of an Israeli government, and some of that is at the hands of their own government, where Hamas and in some cases Fatah have ruled their area, have not provided the kind of social advancement that they should have. So I don't think that Israel is without, the government of Israel is without blame in some of these things. And there is a Palestinian argument to be made. But that argument, I think, ultimately comes to a two-state solution rather than a one-state solution in which Israel ceases to exist. But again, I give you a personal opinion. None of this is part of my tenure as a state senator. None of this affects me as a county executive. If I live long enough and you find me ever running for national office, we'll do another interview and we'll talk about that.
Well, the only reason why I brought this question up is because I have seen people in this country, in Westchester County, preaching these things and asking people to sign petitions. So even though the organization is international in scope, and I realize your jurisdiction is only in Westchester, it is going on here.
Understood.
That's why I asked your opinion. Okay, thank you for your answer. Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino's claim to fame as a politician has been his policy of not raising property taxes for voters. And you know, that's a pretty good line. It's tough to beat. What would you say to young people just entering the workforce looking for jobs or people approaching retirement who are struggling here in Westchester economically, but yet they want to stay here. Why is your plan better than his?
Well, first of all, I challenge the assertion that everybody seems to accept that Astorino has not raised taxes. He has raised taxes, but he has done it in a way that is not immediately apparent based on looking at one indicator, which is your county tax levy. Levy, not your tax bill. I ask anybody who's watching this, go home, pull out your 2011 property tax bill, pull out your 2016 tax bill, look at them, and you tell me if you've paid more in 2016 than in 2011. And I bet you quite a few people will see that they have, because the county property tax bill is more. It involves sewer district, it involves refuse district. I know people say, oh, that's like detailed stuff. It's a detailed stuff analysis that shows you that this claim of tax freeze is baloney. Now, let's go to the heart of your question, which is what do you tell young people?
4 minutes
Young people
left.
are starting out. They're not thinking about their tax bill. They're thinking about their economic opportunity. We have failed in this county to show dynamic economic development growth, and primarily because the county government is trying to do its own thing rather than join forces with the business community. The business community, organizations like the County Association and the Business Council of Westchester, have a visionary view of where we have to go in the future to grow jobs and opportunity, not just manage the moment and try to deliver, whatever works for this next day or two. We need to expand in this county our ability to deal with a technological society that has jumped well ahead of us. If we don't make those governmental investments in infrastructure because we're worried about every penny, and we lose the dollars that will come out of economic development, that economic development will go to Fairfield County. It will go to northern New Jersey. It will stay in Manhattan, and it won't come to Westchester County. So we need, as a county government, to put our resources behind the efforts of the business community in a dynamic way. We need to talk about workforce development and the skill sets needed for the jobs that are coming, not the jobs that used to be here, but the jobs that are going to be here. And how do we, using the terrific community college that we have and cooperatively working with the various other higher education institutions, make sure that that workforce is right here in Westchester County, so an entity, a company, whether it's small manufacturing or large corporation, will decide to come to Westchester because we've got the workforce you need. And that's where affordable housing matters, because if you can't afford to live here, then you're not likely to work here. And all of those things, in my judgment, have been unaddressed by the current administration. It's a failure on their part to look at economic development in a broad, inclusive fashion.
Okay, due to the fact we only have 2 minutes, I'm going to try to give 2 questions in one, and you go from there. Do you think that engaging in one-shot revenue deals by selling or leasing county assets to pay off budget deficits, example, this year's 2017 projections, $14.3 million in debt, is it responsible to the proposed privatization and leasing of Westchester County Airport a responsible way to govern with without at least having a public hearing, examining the present master plan, which calls for $462 million of spending over the next 15 years and additional construction of parking garages, corporate jet hangars, facility for U.S. Customs, Westchester County Police, plus affecting the water supply at the Kensico Dam?
These are bad ideas. They shouldn't advance. We should not have one-shot deals. We should not privatize the airport. Simple.
Thank you very much. George, it has been an honor again to have you, and I wish you all the best of luck in your bid for the Westchester County Executive.
Thank you, Dennis.
This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.